So aside from placing additional info inside it, there's actually an improper use for it, which I think most writers aren't aware. So in this segment, we're going to discuss the proper use of the parentheses. Now, when using this pair of smileys, you should keep 2 points in mind. First is that parentheses are the strongest separator. When they separate, they de-emphasize anything that they set off. It has quite the opposite function of the dash. The M dash, in particular, adds emphasis, drama, but the parentheses diminishes, decreases, subtracts. Now, when using these, you should also remember to never place an essential idea inside it, because if you intend to emphasize this idea and you place it within parentheses, then that's very counterproductive because you're setting it off as if it's not essential. If it's very important, do not use the parentheses. Use another punctuation mark. Maybe the dash. Now, what are these non-essential ideas that we can set off with the use of these parentheses? We have asides. When we say asides, these are the lines in, let's say, in a play that are intended to be heard by one character only and by the audience, and it's not that important in the script. That's why it's being set off with the use of the parentheses, because the idea can be read by someone, by the few who need to know the idea, but majority don't actually need to know such. That's why writers place such ideas inside parentheses, because the importance may be limited to a small number of readers. Okay? Also, explanations. Let's say there's a difficult word like, yes, you may recall sine qua non, assuming that the writer expects only a few not to understand what sine qua non means. It will place in parentheses a brief definition of the word. Let's have a sample sentence. Actors try to empathize with the characters they portray. In case you don't know the meaning of empathize with, the writer may opt to place in parentheses a brief definition. Not Everyone is ignorant. That's why it need not be emphasized. The definition, that is. Alfred Hitchcock produced some masterful horror films. Assuming that there are a few readers who don't know his masterful horror films, these items can be enumerated within parentheses. This distinction, she won it for Gaslight in 1944 and for Anastasia in 1956, can be parenthetical because the writer may assume that most readers know who Ingrid Bergman is and what her distinctions have been. Use parentheses to set off numerical explanations like dates of a person's birth and death, and around numbers and letters marking a series. So how is that? You see these in historical accounts, in biographies, and other accounts of people who have lived and died eventually. As you can see here, what do you think 1895 to 1926 stands for? It's the span of Rudolph Valentino's life. And you also see this type of marking in tombstones when it wants to emphasize the date of birth, the year of birth, and then the year of death. But in tombstones, they actually carve the complete dates. But in articles like this, especially it's simply parenthetical, they usually just include the year of birth and then the year of death. Unless you are carving something again in tombstones, you write just the years. Okay? Same thing for here. So 16% of each week does not warrant any conversion to ours. Yes, this is actually an option, a very good one at that, to prevent confusion. If you want to make sure that your reader gets the amount accurately, you may enclose in parentheses a numerical representation of the worded amount, $1.50. During the summer, I read several books, The Mosquito Coast, Growing Up, and My Antonia. Yes, you may also use parentheses to set off numbers. And aside from numbers, you may also have lowercase letters. See? If you want to save space, if you prefer to put at least 2 items in one line, you may use the parentheses with matching symbols and then some commas. Just one note, do not overuse parentheses, because if you have too many of them, it will make it hard for your reader to follow your ideas. Now, let's have a parenthetical exercise before we proceed to the online interactive activity. Again, similar to what we did with dashes, I want you to identify where to place the parentheses in each sentence. If you want to challenge yourself, you can delay the shifting from one scene to another by pausing the video intermittently, depending on your pace. But please do not simply fast forward to where the answers are. There's no challenge there. Okay, begin. Yes, more often than not, broken is an optional comment. It need not be there. When a phrase or declarative sentence interrupts another sentence, do not use an initial capital or end mark inside the parentheses. There are times when we place within parentheses a sentence in the middle of the main sentence, like in this sample sentence. The show preempted my favorite program. It began at 8 is a declarative statement, a complete sentence, an independent clause, but it's placed in the middle. If that happens, especially if it's in a parentheses, you need not punctuate it nor capitalize it. Okay? Recalling the primary rule on using periods, as long as it's a sentence, capitalize the first word. But in this case, since the sentence is parenthetical, you merely leave it lowercase, all of the letters. Okay, that's the only exception. But if the interrupting expression is an interrogative or exclamatory sentence, we have another rule for that. We capitalize the first letter and place the end mark, okay, the question mark or exclamation point at the end of the parenthetical sentence, like in this case. The comment, isn't that filmed in Hawaii? Is a question, so we capitalize isn't and then we place the question mark at the end. Even if it's parenthetical, even if it interrupts the flow of the main sentence. Walt Disney's version of Cinderella. See, here we have an unsolicited comment that the writer wrote. So it's also fine to do that, as long as you punctuate and capitalize properly. With any sentence that falls between two complete sentences, use both an initial capital and an end mark inside the parentheses. If you're not placing in parentheses interrupting expressions, but a sentence that's completely isolated from the main sentence, you can still set it off with the use of the parentheses with proper capitalization and punctuation. This is also okay since the writer here would want to add more information on the movie. Now, if it's a set of phrase, not sentence, but phrase, you may place any punctuation belonging to the main sentence after the parentheses. I think this is commonly used. It's a phrase, a sample episode of a series. So, parentheses, and then after the parentheses, comma, immediately. Sesame Street features a variety of puppet characters originated by Jim Henson. Again, we use any punctuation mark. Yes, it's also possible to do it like this since it's a phrase and then it's properly punctuated with parentheses. Now let's have the next set of exercise. I want you to identify which letter to capitalize and which punctuation mark to use for each item. So are you ready? Begin. It was the most beautiful shade of blue is supposed to be punctuated like this because it's an unsolicited comment. And then intense at that. This is a question, obviously. To test your parenthetical skills, answer the following exercise. Now, just the same with the previous ones, I placed the links in the description below. But again, do not hesitate to watch the first parts of this video lecture before you proceed to the interactive exercise. Not unless you consider yourself a pro at this, but even an expert writer like me would never proclaim his expertise because I believe in continuous improvement. As long as one engages in a craft, learning doesn't stop and making mistakes won't as well. So, thank you again for watching another segment of the video lecture series on reading and writing. Stay tuned for the next set of punctuation marks.